UMAA, who is always so kind in helping us with facilitating our Zoom sessions. And I want to thank my fellow board members who are with us today. And that should include Dee Peterson, Dan Foy, Michael Anderson, Karen Phoebe, Trent Blomberg, and our former treasurer, Tom Hansen, who we all love, is also on. And then, as you may or may not be aware of, UMAA and the University and the University of Minnesota Alumni Association have requested that we schedule no events in person. So that means there's no football watching, and if anybody should ask any of you at any time about football watching, we are not doing those activities. I'm sorry, but these Zoom sessions are our way of creating connections to the Gophers DC, which is so important. There are two things that you should put on your calendars. By now, you should have all gotten the invitation for November 16th, when President Joan Gable is having a special session with people in the Mid-Atlantic. A webinar session. So hopefully all of you will sign up for that. And if you didn't get the first invitation, there'll be more invitations coming. So please sign up with that. It's not the same as having her here in person, but that isn't going to happen for a while. The other thing that I would like you to put mark on your calendars is November 18th. The 16th is on a Monday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The 18th of November is at noon. For those of you who may recall, last October or something around there, we had Aaron Blake, a U of M alum who works for the Washington Post and is a political guru at the Post. He promised he'd come back, and we've scheduled the 18th at noon. We're both fairly confident, and I knock on wood, that we will know results by November 18th. So mark your calendar. That should be most intriguing. He's very perceptive, very knowledgeable. And just so that you know, several of you have sent in questions, which I appreciate. And after our guest finishes his remarks, we will go to questions. So off to our special guest today. Geir Haarde is the executive director at the board of the World Bank. Is the director at the board of executive directors of the World Bank, representing Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and Sweden. And he served, as many of you know, as the ambassador of Iceland to the United States from 2015 to 19. Many of us were in his home for holiday receptions. He was the Prime Minister of Iceland from 2006 to 9, as well as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ministers of Finance, Member of Parliament, member of the International Monetary and Financial Committee of the IMF, President of the Nordic Council, and a host of other political and government positions. He's very impressive, and boy, are we lucky to have him today. He is indeed a Gopher also, because he received a master's in economics from the university in 1977, and I'm sure that's what's guiding him today in his current position. Most importantly, our guest received the Above Average Alumni Award in 2019. And during his time as ambassador, as I alluded to, he and his amazing wife, Inga, hosted us twice for our holiday embassy reception. In addition to that, he's come to multiple events that we used to hold in the good old days. And everyone should have a favorite Icelandic ambassador. And there is no one out there who exhibits Gopher pride and adopted Minnesota nice than our guest. And welcome, Your Excellency, Geir Haarde. You're on, sir.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for having me, and thank you for this wonderful introduction. It's great to be back in this community of alumni from the University of Minnesota, although we are all virtual today. I have very fond memories of our get-togethers at my residence, the two Christmas parties that we had, and also thank you very much for honoring me last year with the below average.
No, it's above.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. So when Susan contacted me, I decided that the thing I would talk about would be my current position at the bank, the World Bank and the COVID-19 crisis. So let me give you, by way of background, some information about the bank and what it's all about. It is probably, and it is without doubt, the biggest so-called development institution in the world. It was founded in 1945. It is one of the Bretton Woods institutions that came along after the end of the Second World War. And its purpose has been reconstruction and development ever since. First of all, in the beginning, it was more reconstruction. After the war, the first loan went to France for reconstruction after the war, but now it's exclusively development, meaning the furthering of economic benefits in the poorer countries of the world. So it has defined its purpose with the so-called twin goals. And the twin goals is number one, the elimination of extreme poverty, and number two, shared prosperity. And poverty, extreme poverty, is defined actually as $1.90 a day per person, which for us is, of course, nothing. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people in the world in different places that have to scrape through on an income like that. Although, of course, many of them live in what's called an informal economy, where people, which is not not formalized economic transactions. But still, overall, it has a membership of 189 countries who are shareholders in the bank. And we, the shareholders, are represented on the board of the executive directors. There are 25 of us on the board. So most of us represent more than one country. And like Susan mentioned, I represent 8 countries, the Nordic and the Baltic states. The biggest countries in the world, who are the biggest shareholders, they only represent themselves. There is an ED, we call them ED, executive director from the US, representing only the US. Same is true for Japan, China, UK, Germany, France, and actually Russia, although they also represent Syria. Everybody else is in what we call a constituency with multiple members. Some over 20 countries in the constituency. All of Africa, with over 50 countries, is represented by 3 EDs who divide the countries among themselves. So this is a little bit of the background. The bank is organized basically into 4 main independent parts. One is the original International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which now focuses on lending to middle-income countries. Then there is the International Development Association, called IDA, which focuses on the very poorest of the poor, and gives concessional lending, highly concessional lending, and grants to these countries. Then we have what's called the International Finance Corporation, IFC, which deals with promotion of business in the private sector all over the world. And then we have what is called the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which helps with guarantees, particularly guaranteeing people against or investors against political risk. So the bank has been doing, I think, terrific work in its area for many years. And there had been tremendous progress in terms of eliminating extreme poverty. That line had gone down very significantly over the past decades. So the number of people living in abject poverty has gone down in absolute terms, and also, of course, relatively. But this COVID crisis is turning that around, and we will be seeing a setback taking us back maybe 20 years in terms of the numbers of poor people. And it will be, the crisis is adding every day new people who have been able to push themselves out of poverty back below the poverty line. I think maybe something like 100 million people will fall back into that situation as a result of this crisis. So the bank has been very focused on how to respond to this. And the question, of course, at the beginning was, how can the bank help? What can this institution do to respond to a crisis of this enormous magnitude? Now, of course, we, like everybody else, had to go to virtual work at the middle of March. But in spite of that, the bank has been working very effectively. We have over 130 offices all over the world, mostly in the poorer countries. And all these people out there have been also working virtually. In spite of that, there is a lot of work that has been done in terms of developing finance opportunities and ways to bring assistance to the poorest countries in this situation. At the outset, the bank figured out that it would be able to disperse $160 billion for this purpose over the next 15 months. That is to say, from the middle of March of this year until the end of June next year, which is the fiscal year. The fiscal year is from July 1st to June 30th. So $160 billion, that's a lot of money. And this is done by redirecting funds from other areas and focusing on the crisis. We started by a bunch of lending to a group of countries, including $1 billion to India, and as little as 2.5 for one of the very small African countries. So anywhere in between there, you will have different variations of lending, of support to these countries. And we have now reached, through this effort, 111 countries who qualify for this COVID response financing. So this has been everything from funding for protective gear, ventilators, ambulances, hospital equipment, everything that you can think of in that area. So, and this has been the focus since the beginning of the crisis. We are now looking forward to being able to go into the next phase, which will be, pulling ourselves out of this, to reconstruct out of the crisis. And we have a term for that, which is called building back better. And some people say building back better and greener. It has nothing to do with Joe Biden. We came first. He is using this also, but that's a coincidence, I think. So building back greener and better is what we will be emphasizing. And what is happening now is that the bank has been able to put this money to work at extreme speed. Instead of going through all the bureaucratic motions that normally happen with respect to organizing a loan to some of these poorer countries, there were a lot of shortcuts taken to expedite things. And that has been very important. And although, of course, we still have the standards that people need to meet, environmental and social standards and things like that that are required. But this has been done through a lot of effort, particularly in the people in the country offices out in the field. So the bank has about 9,000 people working here in Washington, and then another 7,000 working in the field in different places. And these people have bore the brunt of the work, of course, under the guidance and leadership of management here in Washington. And we as a board have been overseeing all of this, and we have to approve all of these projects. Some of it is done through delegated authority to the management, but it is the responsibility of the board, and we have the fiduciary responsibility for the operations of the bank. So we need to make sure that all the protocols are followed and that the money does not get siphoned off for unintended purposes. Of course, corruption is a problem in many of these places. We know that, and the bank is very firm when it comes to trying to avoid those kinds of situations. So we just had last week our annual meetings, or about 10 days ago. Those were virtual. Normally, about 10,000 people come to DC to attend those meetings because there are all kinds of side events that are organized along with the formal meetings. This was all virtual this year, and there were some important decisions made both on the World Bank side and at the sister institution at the IMF regarding how we move forward in this horrible crisis. So one major decision that was actually taken in the spring at the initiative of the World Bank president and the top management of the IMF is what is called the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, DSSI, and this has to do with giving the poorest countries who qualify a grace period in terms of their external debt to create some fiscal space for them to address the crisis. So the DSSI was originally intended to last from May 1st to the end of this year. And now 10 days ago, it was decided to give them an extra 6 months with the possibility of an additional 6 months until the end of 2021. Now, clearly, you cannot just keep going with debt suspension. You have to do something more drastic. And the IMF is busy with doing what they call debt sustainability analysis, which is figuring out which countries absolutely will never be able to pay back their debt and what to do about that. And unfortunately, there are quite a few low-income countries who are in that category. And the trick here is to do something that does not incentivize people to borrow more because they can figure out that they will never have to pay back. And that there has to be conditionality in these things so that reforms are undertaken and so on. So this is a separate chapter, the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, which we can talk about some more if people are interested. Anyway, I think this crisis has shown the World Bank at its best. It has been absolutely breathtaking to witness the response. And I think this bank is in the forefront as far as the international community is concerned in this field. And I must say it's very gratifying personally to see this and to be a small part of it. And I'm really pleased that I have had that opportunity, although these working conditions and everything else around this crisis have been so horrific. And the situation in many countries, not just the US, all over the world. not getting better at the moment. I don't think anything will happen in that regard until we get vaccines. And the bank has actually decided, the board of the bank has approved putting $11 billion aside in order to help the poorest countries acquire and distribute and deploy vaccines in their countries, so to make sure that the richer countries in the world do not grab everything that's available in terms of vaccines when they become available. So let me stop here and see if people would like to discuss any of this or would have questions for me. Be happy to take questions. Thanks. Back to you, Susan.
Yes. Okay. The first question is, who is the U.S.'s representative to the World Bank?
So the U.S., like I said, has one executive director, and we each have a staff around us. I have one person from every country I represent, and then we have support staff. We have professionals from every country. So the US ED now is a lady called DJ Nordquist. And she used to be chief of staff at the Council of Economic Advisors before moving over to the bank last year. And I believe her husband is also working as an economist at the White House, Mr. Nordquist.
Okay, so before we go into specific questions, I just have a question, because since we're in the heart of DC and people always have politics on their mind, how has the last 4 years in the election this year had an effect on the World Bank in your activities? Is there trepid? I mean, I'm just get a sense of, does it affect your actions at all? Do you look to the future? Do you look back? How does that work?
Officially, it doesn't affect us. You know, the bank operates on the basis of its articles of agreement. And but there is a tradition that the president of the bank is always an American. And on the other side of the street at the IMF, the tradition is that it's always a European at the head of that organization, now a lady from Bulgaria. So the current president, David Malpass, was elected or chosen last year when his predecessor decided to leave. And he was picked by the current president, Mr. Trump, and his administration. And then to follow the tradition, the board officially nominates this person or hires this person. But there is never any doubt that when the US authorities suggest someone, that person will be approved by the board. Now, Malpass actually went around the world and had interviews with the authorities in different countries. He went to China, spoke with President Xi. He went to France, spoke with President Macron. He came to Iceland and met with the Nordic governors of the bank, the ministers who are responsible for the bank in each country. I was at that meeting. That's the first time I met him. So he will continue. It's a 5-year appointment, and I don't think that anything will happen with respect to that office, even if there is a change in the presidency. That has not been the tradition. But I think there may be, of course, many different policies by a new administration that will directly and indirectly affect the bank. The bank, for instance, is very active in promoting climate change adaptation and mitigation. So this matter, you know, is somewhat frowned on by the current administration. And of course, the US was pulled out of the Paris Agreement on climate change. I think if Mr. Biden wins, he will probably have the US re-enter the Paris Agreement, and the US will not be as suspicious of the World Bank activity when it comes to climate change. So this is an example of things that might happen, but we are not, we are off limits when it comes to US politics. None of us have the right to vote, of course, apart from US citizens. and we don't get involved. And we have to be careful, actually, not to be seen as being partisan in any way.
So some people sent in questions ahead of time, so I'm going to quickly go through those. What has been the response of the World Bank to the president removing our country from the World Health Organization, which won't happen? I mean, if there's a new president, we may very well not go forward with it, but how did that affect your thinking there?
Well, this is a problem area. I mentioned climate change, but this is clearly another area. You know, we just have to work with the World Health Organization out in the field. We have to work with the UN agencies, the World Food Program, for instance, the High Commissioner for Refugees, and other people that are active out in the field. We have allocated money, for instance, to Yemen, but we don't have anybody on the ground that can properly do that. So we do that through the organizations that are actually active in a country like that, which is fragile and in conflict and violence. We have actually a group of countries that we call FCV countries, fragile, conflict and violence, fragility, conflict and violence. And in many of them, we have to work with others like the World Health Organization. And I really hope that this decision to quit the World Health Organization and stop working with them will be reversed. You know, no matter who becomes president, we need them, and
so
they need us.
The next one is kind of tangential to that. And how do you coordinate with groups like USAID and other bilateral donors to the COVID-19 issue?
Well, not so much in Washington, but out in the field. The bank usually couples up or hooks up with other what we call development partners. They might be other multilateral development banks, like in Africa, it would be the African Development Bank, or the Asian Development Bank, or the Inter-American Development Bank for Central and South America, or bilateral donors. And of course, USAID is a big one. And I think out in the field, when developing projects, the bank may not always take all of the risk. It may be shared with others, including USAID and other bilateral agencies. So the Germans, the French, the UK, and the Scandinavians, for instance, are big in many countries. So it would be normal for the bank to look for cooperation and you know, get the benefits from working with others.
You talked a bit about the response of the World Bank to COVID, but what, as you move forward in the next year where things don't seem to be getting better, how are you going to, have you made your priorities into, you talked a little bit about PPE and all those things, but what do you think priorities will be as we go into the next year?
Well, it will be, everything will be part of this Build Back Better program, where we focus on a number of issues, including the problems that are prevalent in the FCV countries that I mentioned, the countries that are affected by fragility, conflict, and violence. And there are incredibly many of those, and many of them are clients of the bank. There are incredibly many countries like that, many of them in Africa, of course, the Sahel countries, and up and down in Africa. And then there is the climate change issue that I mentioned. There is a program called JET, Jobs and Economic Transformation, which is enormously important, because we will not get anywhere in any of these countries if we cannot find jobs, help people create jobs. It's the same as in all of the developed economies. You need to be able to put people to work. And the bank is active in trying to you know, direct its resources to productive use in that way. Let's take, for example, energy. it's amazing how few people actually in several of the African countries have access to energy or electricity. And the bank is active in, energy substitution, moving out of fossil fuels into renewable energies where possible, wind and solar, geothermal, hydropower, etc. So these things are all high on the agenda. There is a special program for small island states, and so on and so forth. And of course, bank is promoting gender equality where possible, and making sure that women and children, who are in many cases who get most hurt by this current crisis, get the help they need. But of course, the bank is unable to do any of this on its own. It needs partners. It needs responsible counterparts in the countries, in the client countries, responsible governments. That is not always the case, unfortunately. And there are countries that are in arrears and have not paid back earlier loan from the bank, and those countries are not able to borrow again until they have gotten rid of the arrears. Now there is also a program to help them to get rid of arrears. Just happened with Somalia this year, and it may happen with Sudan very soon. But a country like Zimbabwe is in arrears and is not getting any help, or very limited help from the bank. So let's see.
There is a, you talk about aid elsewhere. Do you ever give help to the United States? Because the things you were just talking about, women, children, electricity, water, we have in the part of this crisis see on a regular basis on our television, Native American lands and reservations out west that don't have those things either. So is the United States a donor nation, or does the World Bank ever help with programs in the United States?
I'm afraid not. This organization was created, essentially to redirect resources from the richer countries to the poorer, and help the poorer, develop income on their own through economic growth and so on. So if your income is above a certain level, it's around $12,000 per capita per person a year, you do not qualify to borrow from the organization. So that is, when people move up to that point, it's called graduating from the bank. Actually, my own country, Iceland, graduated more than 50 years ago. So, our income per capita is over $60,000 a year. We would never be able to do that. And I think the US is even higher. So, you would have to solve the problems that you refer to in the US at home. And that is what I say. There are so many problems that these countries will have to do and solve and deal with on their own.
Okay, another question that came in is, you represent Sweden, and Sweden gets a lot of kudos from the current president of the United States about the way they dealt with the COVID crisis, with, basically keeping the country open to a great extent. Has the World Bank learned anything from Sweden?
The Swedish approach to this COVID-19 crisis has been very controversial, and it is in Sweden also. This is actually aiming for herd immunity, and they have not reached that by far, and they are in trouble. But so is everybody else, and nobody really knows what the best solution is. There is very restricted travel to and from Sweden from other countries, but so is travel generally, for instance, in Europe. You cannot go to Iceland, for instance, without getting tested at the airport, and then again a few days later, and in the meantime, you have to be in quarantine. Nobody wants to travel on that basis. So there is very limited travel in Europe generally, and between Europe and the US because of this. So, I'm not sure I would recommend the Swedish approach to the COVID crisis. They are, many of them are happy with it, but they also lost a lot of people in the beginning, particularly in nursing homes and so on. So they have lost relatively many more people than the other Scandinavian countries.
Okay. Gabriella, if you would unmute your phone, your microphone, you have a question.
So my question is a little bit more geared to, you were saying that the World Bank and IMF is looking at the debt forgiveness question. And in 1996, the bank and IMF had the program of HIPC, which is the highly indebted countries. Is the bank considering something like that? It was very controversial, especially with countries like the United States and some of the big donors?
Yes, actually, HIPC is still around, and it's still being used. And there is something called the HIPC decision point that you have to reach after you have done certain preliminary reforms and taken some measures. And people are actually hoping that Sudan can get there relatively soon. And then if it gets to that point, it could become part of the HIPC program. You may have noticed the other day that the president took Sudan off the list of countries that are state sponsors of terror. That was a very important step in the whole process. There is a big attempt by the international community now to help Sudan out of the situation it's been in. It has a responsible government now, it seems, that is willing to do the reforms necessary, including eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. So to compensate for that, the bank is willing to lend and give them money to give to people actually as cash transactions in order to compensate for the fossil fuel subsidies that are now going away. And but the problem with Sudan is that they owe like $55 billion, which has been in arrears. So they really need help, but nobody wants to help them unless they are serious about helping themselves. So the answer to the question is HIPC is still around, but what is now being talked about is after the end of the current DSSI, which will be either middle or end of next year, there will be some common framework for how to proceed within individual cases. Maybe you don't need to create a new HIPC, maybe you can use that, but you also need to make sure that there is no discrimination among creditors. In other words, that the fiscal space that is created now by DSSI is not used to pay debt to China, for instance. This is a real concern that many people have, and that private lenders, the private sector must also take part in this. So it's a hugely complicated issue, and many people have been working on these issues for years. There is a new chief economist at the bank, a lady called Carmen Reinhardt, originally from Cuba, came as a kid over here. She's a brilliant economist, and she has spent many, many years working on these debt issues. So I'm just scratching the surface because I haven't dived into it like so many to the extent so many other people have.
Okay, if you have, if anyone has a question, raise your hand and Kablia will let me know. I have a question for you. You represent the Nordic bloc. When you came into this position and as you look to the future post-COVID, are there certain pet projects you want for your bloc, of course, to make the world a better place too, but do you have some thoughts about what you would like to achieve during your term at the World Bank?
No, I don't really have personal ambitions in that regard. I represent a group of small countries, relatively small countries. Mm-hmm. But we have a voice, and it gets listened to at the board. And I think we punch above our weight to a certain extent. We are big donors, for instance, taken together to the IDA program that I mentioned earlier, that is used for concessional lending and also for grants to the poorest of the poor. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we do have a voice, and we, of course, emphasize certain areas above others, more than others. You know, we are big on climate change and energy substitution, which is closely related. And we are all promoting renewable energy. We are, of course, also very interested in the gender issue, wherever it can be raised in a meaningful way, and so on. But, you know, basically, we are all in this together to promote the elimination of poverty. And, you know, and what are the best ways to do that? That may vary according to circumstances in the different countries.
Okay, Mike Anderson has a question. Mike, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello, Mike.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Nice to see you.
Welcome. A warm welcome to you. My question concerns the American people's understanding of multilateral cooperation. We don't seem to have a very good understanding of what that means. I think most polls show that the US, most Americans like the UN, but they don't really have a clue on how different agencies work. And the same, I think, would pertain especially to the World Bank. Everybody thinks it's a big bank that gives out money. Well, no, not quite. It works with governments. My question is this: what is the bank's philosophy or strategy on public affairs, public relations, selling people on the work you are doing? And I would argue World Bank profile is very low. And my guess is out of 99 Americans, or out of 100 Americans, none of them, zero, could tell you who the World Bank president is. So anyway, just can you share the thinking of how you market what the bank is trying to do?
Yes, of course, we do have a public affairs office with a number of people, but the bank, I guess, has never seen it as its purpose to, you know, promote itself. It operates on the basis of an international agreement, intergovernmental agreement, and it is officially one of the daughter institutions of the UN. But I think you are completely right that not many people really know what it's all about, and that it's a function. It's not a regular commercial bank. It is a function. The function is to promote economic development in the poorer countries. So I think, you know, but it is a concern, for instance, when the bank needs more money, and it happens on a regular basis, particularly with respect to IDA, every 3 years, the management of the bank goes to donors and says, now we need to replenish IDA. And this has been done 19 times, and the last one was completed December last year. It was called IDA 19. And now the bank feels that the IDA 19 money, which is supposed to last for 3 years before IDA 20, which would be in 2022, but the money is running out so fast now because of COVID that they need an extra replenishment. So what does that mean? It means that the governments in each individual country that are the donors, in the US, for instance, you need to go to the people who have the power of the purse, the legislatures, the congresses in different countries. And that's not always so easy. And getting people in the US Congress to allocate money to World Bank programs has not always been very easy. And there was a replenishment last year, and it is moving through the Congress. I think it's been approved now. And there was also a big capital increase for the World Bank itself, not IDA, back in 1918. And it was first at the beginning of this year that actually moved through Congress. And it took a lot of maneuvering, persuasion, help from a lot of friends who understand what the bank is all about to get that through Congress, because people are skeptical. Why would you can imagine a congressman from Nebraska or Iowa, you know, saying to their constituents, why would I vote for more money for the World Bank when we are not having enough money to provide in my constituency or in my state. These are legitimate concerns. And this is part of what, elected officials have to think about. And it's part of, living in a democracy. There is always the choice. Do we put money there or do we put it on the other side? And therefore, I think the point you're making is very important, that if people have no idea what the bank is all about, and the likelihood that people out in Iowa or in Nebraska know something about the bank is minimal, and then it's likely that their representatives are not particularly interested in this. So maybe, there needs to be more outreach, more education about the bank. I think that's true.
Okay, Tom Hansen has a question for you. Tom, it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see everybody as well. And Ambassador Haarde, congratulations on your appointment as an executive director. I was really excited to see that. I think you really represent the Baltic and Nordic region well. So
thank you.
Happy to see you there. My question was about, and I think maybe you've touched on this a little bit. Obviously, with COVID-19, it feels like there's been kind of this immediate kind of the DSSI program, which it sounds like is very helpful. And then there's lending, as you mentioned, for the COVID-19 response. And really with the Build Back Better, or kind of I think David Malpass mentioned in his speech, fostering an inclusive and resilient recovery. You mentioned kind of the green aspect of it, like the energy conversion. I know there's been a focus on human capital development, addressing inequality. And I think probably, I assume a lot of those things that were in progress, even before 2020, kind of got put on hold a little bit, with the COVID-19 response and are coming back. So I guess my question is how do you balance all these different kind of the different needs around poverty reduction, reducing inequality? Is the kind of environmental aspect meant to be something that kind of accomplishes several goals, like it expands the economy and provides jobs? How do you incorporate education? If you could just comment a little bit about, I know that's a very kind of complex topic in the Nordic region, I think does really well, with kind of advancing that within their own economies. Are you advising certain approach on this kind of resilient and sustainable recovery?
Absolutely, very definitely so. And the bank in the beginning, in the first decades, was basically an infrastructure bank. It would lend money to big infrastructure projects, roads, airports, power stations, and things like that, which were important, but only benefited maybe a small part of the population. In recent years, it has become much more inclusive in the sense that it is trying to help move whole societies forward. So it is actually lending a lot of money to health, education, and welfare issues, social structures, and this is an important part of what the bank does. Now, another thing that it is important in terms of what the bank can do is its knowledge function. The bank is a vast. Has vast experience and knowledge acquired over the years, and not just a big library and all that, but all the talent that's in that building in terms of the accumulated human capital is just amazing. And helping people in poorer countries and advising them on how best to do things is a very important part of what the bank does. And thirdly, it has important convening power. If the World Bank says, I think we have a problem in this part of Africa that we are not able to solve on our own, we would like to convene other development partners to help us do this, then that is likely to result in something. People trust the lead of the World Bank in issues where we are good, and they are more likely to be able to join and help solve a problem. And this goes back to what I said earlier about development partners and so on. So sometimes it's other multilateral development banks, sometimes it's the bilateral agencies and so on. Sometimes it's local or regional organizations. But these are all very important parts of what the bank does. So it's not just about lending money or giving grants. It's also about advising on how to use that in a proper way. So that was a very
Patrick,
That's great. Thank you.
Patrick, you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering what sort of activities that the bank may be engaged in Israel and the Palestinian territories, and if so, exactly what type of activity has been occurring, and what is its objective?
Yes. Okay. So so Israel is a shareholder in the bank. They are one of the owners. So they are represented on the board. I think they are now in a constituency with the Netherlands and a number of countries in what used to be Eastern Europe. And I think Ukraine is also in that constituency. But they are a donor country. They are what we call a part one. They are above the level where they would be able to borrow. I mean, they are a relatively, of course, a rich country. Now, as far as the Palestinian territories, they are not a shareholder, so they do not have access to lending directly from the bank. However, the bank has found other ways to assist people on the ground there, and this has happened during the COVID crisis. And this is more like a humanitarian assistance, and it's done through indirectly using some of the annual surplus money that is available at the end of each year, and then that is approved at the annual meeting. And Israel has not been unhappy with this. I mean, this is a situation that's worked well for all. You're muted, Susan.
Hello?
Thank you. Is there one last, it has to be a quick question, Paul.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Hello, Geir. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
I have a question specifically about Iceland. I know the tourist economy was probably the biggest sector of the whole economy over there. I assume it's just collapsed. What's the situation there? Well, in light of COVID and also the collapse in the tourism industry.
It's bad. It's horrible. Iceland, their flights have, and the income for Iceland there has gone down by 80%. I was just reading in the third quarter of this year, the flight income from regular operations is down to 20% of what it was. And this is the case for many other activities in the tourist industry back in Iceland. The government has been trying to help. They have not helped the airline directly. They have offered them a guarantee, but the airline actually went for a public offering of shares recently, and which was highly successful. So they are confident that they will make it until traffic picks up again, maybe second or third quarter next year. So they will be okay. But this is the case. This is the problem for all of the airlines all over Europe and all over the world. The U.S. Congress decided to give huge grants to the U.S. airlines earlier in the year, but they still need more. The cruise industry in this country is a mess. They're not getting any support because they're all registered somewhere else. But you are right. The Icelandic tourist industry has been hit very severely, but we are confident that it will come back as soon as travel becomes safe again. Some companies in that business are resilient and will make it. Others are just simply going bankrupt. And it's a horrible situation for many people who are losing their jobs in that industry.
I'm going to take the privilege of asking the last question. The President of the United States says that we're going around the corner and COVID is going to go away. From your perspective within the World Bank, what information can you give us about when we may see some light at the end of the tunnel?
You know, your guess is as good as mine. I think whenever we get vaccines that are widely distributed, we will be in a totally different ballgame. But before that, I'm afraid nothing good will happen. And, you know, the bank has told us that we should not expect to come back to the office to work before the end of this year. They have said early January. I have no doubt that that is unrealistic, that that'll be at least 2 or 3 months, if not more, later in the year. So I'm happy to sit here in my guest room and work. I would prefer to be in my regular office, but you know, it's not a choice that we have. And the bank has said we put the security and the safety and health of the staff number one. Put that first, and so. And you know, they are on the top of their game. I mean, they have health people working hard. They have security people. They know exactly what they are doing, and they coordinate with the local authorities here in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. But things are not looking good, and I'm afraid, you know, maybe in 6 months it might be better. All depends on the vaccines and how they are distributed. Who comes first? Who gets them first? Are they effective and are they safe?
On that bright note, I want to thank you very much, Your Excellency, for joining us today. We truly appreciate it. You have been always so kind to us, and you're showing that again today. So give our greetings to your wife, and hopefully we will see you in person at something soon.
I hope so. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you all for joining in this virtual get-together. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe and healthy. And join us on November 16th and November 18th. Bye, everybody.
Okay, goodbye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank-
You're welcome.